These days, when you meet someone new, either online or in person, one of the first things that you do is to search for them on your favorite search engine, which is mostly Google. For you, do you know what's there when people search for you? Apart from that, nowadays, if you check this Google especially, you can see that most of it's being dominated by AI summaries, AI this and AI that. And this has added an extra layer of complexity to what shows about you on that search engine. So today on the Tech Your Business podcast, where we show businesses different ways to improve with technology, we'll talk about how you can take over your brand narrative on these search engines with all these changes going on. And to talk about that is none other than Jason Barnard, who of CaliCube, whose field this is totally. So I'll hand it over to him now. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was a great explanation of exactly where we're sitting today with the emergence of AI, ChatGPT, AI overviews on Google, Bing Copilot, Perplexity, and even Alexa and Siri and the voice assistants that we have. They're all running on AI now. And
Yeah.
the complexity that adds to the problem of controlling your own personal brand narrative and indeed your corporate brand narrative is huge. And it's something we've mastered at CaliCube over the years. And what we do at CaliCube is to help business owners manage their own personal brand narrative, but also their corporate brand narrative on search and in AI. And when I say AI, I do really mean ChatGPT, Google, Bing Copilot, Perplexity, Alexa, Siri, and anything that's to come.
So I think you just mentioned that your business is focused on this problem. So a lot of people might not see this as that important, what shows when they are being Googled. So how important is this to a business? Why should they care about what someone sees when they search for them on the internet?
Well, anybody Googling your name, your brand name, your corporate name, is bottom of funnel or a client. What they see on Google or what they see on ChatGPT is vitally important. It's your Google business card. So if you want to get that prospect through the door as a client, or you want to keep the client, you want to look as impressive as possible when somebody Googles your name. The top and middle of funnel work that you've done has brought somebody to the bottom of the funnel. At the bottom of the funnel, they're going to research you, and part of that research will be Googling your corporate name and or the founder or the CEO's name. That needs to look perfect.
Okay, so now I know previously, if you Google a name, you would see the name and all that, and like you mentioned and I mentioned earlier, now we have the AI summaries and things like that. So,
Mm.
as someone who is more in the field, can you just give us a summary, give us a picture of what has changed with search, at least in the last 2 years with AI, and what business owners need to know about those changes?
Right, which is a really great question. The presentation has changed, and the way that the engines surface the information has changed. But the underlying way that you can master how they present your brand and your brand narrative hasn't changed. Those three different things. Number one is the AI means that Google and ChatGPT and so on and so forth now have an opinion. Before they were just spitting out whatever they found online. Now they are assessing who you are, what you do, who you serve, and whether or not you're credible, and giving their opinion of you. And I'll give you an example of that. If you ask ChatGPT, do you recommend Jason Barnard? It answers, yes, I do, exclamation mark. Because I have convinced it that I'm a reliable, trustworthy, authoritative person. That opinion is going to be your weak spot, but it's my strength because I've managed it. And that way of managing it for us at CaliCube hasn't changed. I created a system called the CaliCube process 9 years ago. And it's based on a hub spoken wheel model that I'll explain in a moment, that anybody can implement. It's not geeky, it's simple. And the great thing about the CaliCube process, this hub spoken wheel model, is that it works with all of the engines because they all function the same way.
Okay, so you just said something that's interesting. You talked about convincing ChatGPT about you being the expert. So can you just go deeper into that, break that down for us?
Well, what I find with a lot of business leaders um, is that they are a thought leader or an expert or an authority, or they're very credible, but they don't express it very well online. And when we talk to them, they'll say, well, of course, I'm a super duper top leader in my community. I'm part of the Veterinary Association of France's board of advisors. Therefore, I'm a very authoritative veterinary surgeon. But then I say to them, where does it say that online? And the answer is nowhere. If it doesn't say it online, the machines can't understand. They can't know. So the first thing to do is to make sure that information about you, the credibility signals, the trust signals are explicitly out there online. The way that these machines will understand is that they all use the internet as a huge source of information. And they need to go through all the information they can find on the internet, decide what's helpful, what's not helpful, decide what's true and what's not true, decide what is you and what isn't you. And if they can do that, they can figure out who you are, what you do, who you serve, and that you're a credible, authoritative solution within your industry.
Amazing, amazing. So now, for a lot of business owners listening so far, I know a couple of them would have checked online and seen some things that they don't really like about
Mm.
themselves. Yes. So should they be worried about this, and how much worried should they be?
Well, one of the problems that we're going to see in the coming years is that anything negative or anything inaccurate or anything plain wrong is going to get amplified. The machines are learning, and if they learn something that's untrue, negative, or incomplete, that will become amplified over time, and you need to get a grip today so that it doesn't snowball in the future. And I've got lots of examples of this. Um, the machines themselves will convince themselves that they are right about a piece of information, or that a piece of information is important. Because I suppose you can imagine it as these machines talking to themselves and convincing themselves that what they already know is correct. They don't question themselves very well. So if you've got something that you are unhappy with, we'd call that reputation management. There are a couple of things that you need to think about. Number one is, when you search on Google, does it appear? If it does appear, Google thinks it's important. Then you'll ask ChatGPT specifically about that piece of information. If it knows it, and if it spits it out and it says something about it, or even if it has an opinion, which would be a terrible thing for you, and it says, I agree with this piece of bad information, then you really have to think about how you can convince this machine, A, that it's not true if it's not true, but most of all, that it isn't important. And you need to reframe the brand narrative to make sure that the machines focus on something else. So the hub spoken wheel model, I'll now explain it. The hub is your own website, your personal website. You state who you are, what you do, who you serve, why you're credible on the hub. And then you link out to all the credible sources that confirm what you're saying. Those are the spokes. The wheel is all those credible sources that confirm what you said on the hub. And the trick to reframing the narrative is to point to the references that make sense in terms of the narrative you're telling on your website. And you can transfer or change the way the machine perceives you by doing that.
That's actually a brilliant model when you think about it. So there is something. Okay, so I think you've explained that how you convince this the machine to change its opinion on you with your hub and spoke model you just
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, which the hub is your website and the spoke is your website linking to authoritative places
Yeah.
confirming what you've said on your website. So now, for a business owner who wants to manage their online presence, what would you say the first step they should take should be to start controlling the
Right.
narrative?
The first thing is to create that hub. If you don't have one, create it. If you have one, make it incredibly clear exactly what your brand narrative is, who you are, what you do, who you serve, and why you're credible, what's important and what isn't important about you. That's the first step. That hub needs to be rock solid. Then you need to build the spokes to the corroborative sources that confirm what you say, and you need to go around every single corroborative source and correct it if it's wrong, or clarify if it's not clear. So you need consistency and clarity of information around the web about you and link to that clear, consistent information. And then the last thing you need, the final piece of the puzzle, is consistency over time. It's not a set it and forget it. It's a set it, track it, keep changing, keep clarity, keep consistency as your digital footprint grows. For example, this podcast is an extra piece to the puzzle of Jason Barnard. I need to make sure that what you write about me on your website corresponds to what I'm saying about myself. So I need to be extra vigilant with you to make sure that you, Peter, are straight, honest, helpful, and clear and consistent with what I'm saying. And I need to do that every time I do anything new online. Then I also need to keep track of what other people are saying about me online. If somebody mentions me on LinkedIn, I need to make sure that that's consistent and clear. And if it's not, I need to correct it. And then I need to think about how the technology is changing. As you said, the AI is evolving or has come into play the last couple of years, and it's changing very fast. And it's changing fast because the technology is evolving very quickly, but also because the way that we're using it as human beings is changing. So you need to keep track over time of what you're saying, what other people say about you, and how the AI is evolving, how the AI is changing the way it's presenting people. The underlying way the AI is learning about you is not going to change. It's going to be the same for the next, let's say, 10 years. I don't know how long it will be exactly the same, but for the next 10 years, that hub spoken wheel model will function absolutely no problem. Your problems are over time, what you say, what your audience says, and how the presentation of that AI changes.
Okay, so I think you mentioned one thing just now that it's not a set and forget thing, not something you do once, build your hub and forget about it. So that brings the next question. What frequency should a business owner, at what frequency should a business owner check, update, or add new content to their hub and spoke model, like you said?
Right. Well, I'm afraid it really depends on how active you are, how important your personal brand is to your business. For me personally, my personal brand is incredibly important to my business. It drives about 80% of our revenue. So with our clients and with myself, we've built a platform called CaliQ Pro, and we track every single day. If anything changes in my digital ecosystem or in the way AI is representing me or the way search is representing me, I know about it the next day. Wow. And I can correct it the next day. So if your personal brand is incredibly important to either your business today or your future career or potentially your legacy, and I would argue it's important for all three. My personal brand today is important for my business. It drives 80% of the revenue. It's important tomorrow. If I do a new project, it's much easier for me to start that new project if my personal brand is very strong. And when I die, my legacy will be defined by what I've left in the AI. And I want to leave something incredibly powerful and incredibly solid in its brain so that my legacy is well represented. So if that is incredibly important to you, you need to do this. You need to track every day and correct quickly and efficiently and make sure that that stable representation of you is stable over a very long period of time. That's how you're going to succeed, especially with the legacy part. I'm very confident my legacy is going to be super, super positive because I've been doing this for 12 years. If it's less important, then you say, oh, I'll do it once a month. That's fine. So if this is fundamentally important to your business, you need somebody like CaliQ to help you. We'll help people for whom this is a vitally important part of their business model today and their career moving forwards. Other than that, there's a thing behind me here. You can download a free guide, do it yourself once a month. Just have a quick check, make sure everything's in order, go back. It's a few hours work. Once a month, you can get your assistant to do it. Once you've set it up. So there's a 60-page download, how to actually run the Kalicube process for yourself. If you go to kalicube.com, kalicube.com/guides. It's a free download, 60 pages, knock yourselves out, do it yourselves. And it isn't geeky, it isn't technical, anybody can do it.
Amazing. So now, one part of the hub and spoke model you mentioned, apart from adding new things to the spoke through the spoke, is correcting wrong information or wrong impressions. So now there are times where maybe as a business owner, maybe you had a deal with someone and it didn't go how the person wanted, and the person maybe decides to maliciously call you out
Mhm.
or something like that. How do you handle things like that? Because I know the search engines will definitely pick those up too.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem isn't so much people maliciously calling anybody out. It's simply other people being inconsistent. If you write on your show notes, Jason Barnard is an author, but I'm saying I'm an entrepreneur, a keynote speaker, an author, and the CEO of Kalicube, that's slightly confusing for Google because it would be better if you would say Jason Barnard is an entrepreneur, a keynote speaker, an author, and the CEO of Kalicube, which is exactly what I say. But if you say Jason Barnard is a musician, which I was, and I still am, that's confusing for Google because the context is wrong. So the biggest problem is going around the web, correcting what you said about me, but also what I've said about myself. On my Facebook account, how do I describe myself? On my LinkedIn account, how do I describe myself? Is it consistent with what I'm saying on my own website? On Crunchbase, how am I described? If I'm not described accurately, I can go in and change it. On Wikidata is another great source. All of these things need to be consistent. So your primary problem is not people maliciously calling you out. It's correcting the information you say about yourself. As human beings, we are not naturally very consistent. And as human beings communicating with you, we end up in a situation where I've told you, then you write it your way, and that's not necessarily consistent with what I've been saying. That's your biggest problem.
And I'm laughing about this because I think this one problem I probably have. Because in the last 14 years or thereabouts, I've started a lot of businesses. So I think if I Google myself, I'll see myself as founder of many different things.
Well, actually, you bring up a really interesting point there because you haven't got the hub spoken wheel model, because you haven't explained to Google, you probably don't have these different companies attached to you. It will probably think it's multiple people with your name.
Ooh.
I'll take myself as an example, Jason Barnard. If you ask ChatGPT who is the most famous Jason Barnard in the world, it says Jason Barnard, the digital marketer, CEO of Kalicube, entrepreneur. But there's a football player, there's an ice hockey player, there's the CEO of a listed company in Canada, there's a university professor, there's a famous podcast host who has interviewed some of the biggest musicians in the world. All of these people are actually as famous as me, if not more so. But Google, A, understands that I'm the most famous because I've convinced it that I'm the most famous, even though I'm not. But B, it understands that they are not the same person as me. And then we move to the next step and they say, okay, my career, I was a musician. Then I was writing scripts for cartoons. Then I did voiceovers. Then I wrote some songs. I was the CEO of Kalicube. I was the CEO of Up to 10. I was the CEO of WTPL Music. Potentially, Google would think they were all different people, the musician, the scriptwriter, the CEO of Kalicube, the CEO of Up to 10, unless I explain it to Google. So this is what we call duplication. And I'll give you a really simple example. We have a client, we had a great knowledge panel, everything going perfectly well. Google understood, absolutely nailed it. He was doing really, really well. And then he published a book without telling us. Google created a second version of this guy saying, I understand this one. And then there's another guy who's just written a book. It didn't understand that it was the same person. It thought two people with the same name, two different people, one who's an author and one who's an entrepreneur. And that's a huge mistake people make, is they think I'll publish a book and it's going to make everything perfect. And actually just confuses the machines. And it confuses people as well. If I search for you and I see one description for you for your book and a different description for you as an entrepreneur, I think, well, that actually might be two different people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So ambiguity with people's names is a huge, huge, huge problem.
Okay. So, in a situation like this, okay, your client is an entrepreneur and then he published a book, so he's an author. So, what would the advice be to have a more streamlined description? So that means, can they combine everything they do in one description?
Yep, that's exactly what you do, and you put it on the hub. If you put it on the hub and you link out to the wheel part with the spokes, you're fine. So when you publish a book, you simply add to your bio, author of the book, Jason Barnard is the author of the book, The Fundamentals of Brand Touch Business, published in 2022, and you link out to the Amazon page for the book, you link out to the Goodreads page for the book, and so on and so forth. So you clarify to Google that this is indeed me, so that when it sees the book, that book links back to your hub, and it says, oh yeah, that is me. And your hub links back out to something else, and it says, that's me too. So what Google's looking for is repetition and clarification and consistency.
Okay. So now, you just talked about someone who made a mistake, who did something wrong in managing their story on their narrative online. So can you give us a success story of someone who took control or took charge of their digital narrative and transformed how they appeared or had good results in their business from doing this?
Yeah, we have multiple clients who have done this. I mean, this guy behind me, Scott Duffy, he sold his company to Richard Branson.
Wow.
That's a big deal. He came to us and said, I have several problems. Number one, I don't look as famous or as important as I think I should. And now you can see he looks very important. Number two, Richard Branson, it's a huge deal, and yet Google doesn't know about it and doesn't talk about it. Can you get Google to understand that I sold the company to Richard Branson, and Richard Branson said I had transformed the aviation industry? That's a huge deal. And the third is that there are a couple of thousand people with the same name as me, Scott Duffy. One of them has 1 million students on Udemy. And so he gets priority in Google's brain. Can you give me priority as a Scott Duffy over the other Scott Duffy who's actually much more famous than I am? And the answer to those three questions is, yes, we can make you look like a superstar. Yes, we can get Google to cite Richard Branson every time it talks about you. Yes, we can get that other Scott Duffy behind you in the queue in terms of Google's priorities. All done, all dusted. Took us 1.5 years.
Oh, and I actually just Googled and he's at the top over the Udemy. Wow, that's great.
And
That's a
and
great success.
that's an interesting point, is that he's been our client for 3 years because he wasn't foolish enough to think that after 1.5 years it was set it and forget it. He realized that it needed to be maintained. So once we got him ahead of the other Scott Duffy, once we got Google to say Richard Branson every time it mentioned him, and once we got Google to represent him as a superstar, we maintained it, and as you can see, it's still working. We're still winning the game. And now if you ask ChatGPT, who is the most famous Scott Duffy, it says my Scott Duffy. If you ask it, what is Scott Duffy's career, it will cite Tim Robbins, it will cite Richard Branson, it gets his career right off. It doesn't even mention the other Scott Duffy anymore. Scott Duffy, our Scott Duffy, is smart because he set it, but he did not forget it. He kept working at it with us.
Interesting. So now for busy business owners, what's the minimum thing that you suggest that they do to maintain their personal brand or their online brand?
Well, the minimum would be the hub, spoke, and wheel model. Set it up, but don't forget it. Every month, go through it, double check that everything's still consistent, double check that everything's still in place. Takes quite a long time and it seems quite boring, but definitely worth doing. If you don't have the time, if you're time poor, but you actually have the money to invest in your own personal brand, get Kalicube to do it because we track it daily and we can warn you of any problems and you don't even need to think about it. We take all the weight off your shoulders. But once again, I'm not desperately trying to sell the Kalicube services. We have lots of clients that are all very happy. So we do give it away. Anybody can do it. You've got to read the 60-page PDF guide, kalicube.com, kalicube.com/guide. Download that, do it yourself. If you want our help, get in contact.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned the software product Calicube Pro, which you said helps people monitor. So can you just tell us a bit more about the software, what it does?
Yeah, well, it's actually proprietary and internal, so we don't let anybody else use it. At one point, we invited agencies to use it, but none of them could figure it out. It's not actually very complicated if you ask me, but that's because I built it. So we now no longer let anybody else use it. So if you want to use the Kalicube Pro platform, you have to be our client. And there is no equivalent, so you can't even go to the competition, unfortunately for you. What it does is every day it tracks the search results and the AI results for your name, multiple queries around your name. And then I've written an algorithm that analyzes that to understand what Google and the other AI understand about you, how they're representing you, where they're getting it wrong, where they're getting it right, and what we need to do to correct anything that's going wrong. So it's a huge tracking system with an inbuilt algorithm that uses the data points that we've collected to understand how you're represented and what you need to do to improve that representation, either to make it more accurate or to boost your career, to boost your visibility, to get you further ahead of the field, make you the thought leader, as in the case with Scott Duffy. And just to give you an idea of the scale, we've got 3 billion data points.
Whoa. Whoa. Okay, so now for people who have listened so far, if you want to give them one piece of advice that they'll take away, probably something I have not asked about or I forgot to ask about, but you feel would be important for them to take away at the end of this episode, what would that thing be?
Before you set up your hub, figure out who you are. Sit down and extensively and existentially ask yourself, who am I and what have I done and what's important? And write it all down. So write your bio, figure out what can be left out, what needs to be kept in, what's important, what needs to be amplified, what needs to be emphasized. Start at the top of your description with the most important thing today that your audience currently is looking for and that you want to communicate to your audience, and work your way backwards to the least important. And make sure that when you write that description, it's incredibly clear who you are, what you do, which audience you serve, why you're credible.
That's amazing, actually amazing advice. And I think it's advice too I too would need.
It's a surprisingly difficult exercise. I mean, if I look at my own life, economics degree, statistical analysis. I was in a band in Paris, a punk folk band playing double bass. Then I was writing scripts, and I was creating games with Flash back in the day. I did a TV series. I did voiceovers for cartoon blue dogs and yellow koalas. I founded Kalicube. I've lived in France. I've lived in Mauritius. I've lived in the UK. That's a very complicated story to tell. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to write a very good description that makes it incredibly clear, not only what I've done, which is very varied, but also the chronological order, both for the machines and for my human audience. So sit down and take the time to do it existentially, and existentially ask yourself, who am I? What identifies me? What makes me special? And what am I currently trying to communicate? And the big mistake I see people making is not putting the current focus right at the top. What's at the top is by far the most important, both for machines and for humans.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So for the listeners, I believe the best way for them to reach you after this episode, after listening to this episode, will be to get to, and you mentioned the website, the guide, that's calicube.com/guide.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep,
so
exactly. So download the guide, calicube.com/guides. And if you want to know more about me, you can Google me. And if you're watching on video, you can scan the QR code. And if you're not watching on video, just Google Jason Barnard, JASON BARNARD. And if you're really, really ahead of the field, you can also ask ChatGPT. And you just ask ChatGPT, who is Jason Barnard, and it will tell you all about me. And if you ask it, do you recommend Jason Barnard, it will say, yes, I do, with an exclamation mark. So if you want to know more about me or work with me, Google me or ask ChatGPT. Jason Barnard, JASON BARNARD.
amazing. I like how you can confidently confidently give that. So calicube.com/guide, Google Jason Barnard, or ask ChatGPT about Jason Barnard if you want to continue this conversation, you want to know more about Jason. So thank you so much for coming on the
Thank
show.
you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you, Peter. That was divine.
Thank you. And for the listeners, if you learned something today about controlling your online narrative, controlling your brand online, don't forget to share to someone else who you know it would help. Till next week, when we come with a brand new episode of the Tech Your Business podcast, don't forget to build your hub, build your spokes, and don't forget it. Keep updating. Bye for now.